Welcome to The Table, the podcast where we share real stories, struggles, and victories as we walk together in faith. We're back with lie number 4. I'm alone. Have you ever felt alone, physically or figuratively alone? Maybe you feel like you're walking through something that no one else understands. Spoiler alert, in case you haven't heard this today, Jesus is always with you. He promises to never leave you or forsake you. Now that that's out of the way, there's so many more gems in this episode. It's so good. It's real. It's honest. It's vulnerable. All the things that tie us together and build community. So I'll just get right to it. Come to the table and join us as we chat with our special guest today.
All right. Hey, Jenna.
Hey, Catherine.
Hi, Morgan. Welcome to the table.
Thank you.
Jenna, would you like to introduce Morgan to all of our listeners?
Well, I know Morgan. I've known her for a long time because she would keep my kids at a minister's conference that I was the minister's wife, so the wives and families get to come as well. And Morgan was in charge. She's been in charge of lots of things, but she was in charge of the music for a long time. My children love singing with Miss Morgan. She did arts and crafts. You name it, Morgan can do it. And so my kids actually got to know Morgan better than I did at first. But years later, Morgan ended up marrying. She is married to one of my best church childhood friends. And so we have gotten to know each other a lot more in the past few years since the two of them have been married. And she has just been a constant support and encouragement to me. And so I'm happy to introduce Miss Morgan Collins to everyone.
Well, thank
Morgan,
you.
we're so glad you're here. Morgan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and who you are?
Sure. So my name is Morgan Collins. I was born and raised in Indianapolis, and we still live here in Indianapolis. Grew up in church my whole life. Was saved as a young girl, and Jeremy and I, my husband Jeremy, we've been married it'll be 3 years in August. And so just a shout out really quickly, Jenna made the little signs for our wedding with her beautiful calligraphy and her skills, her creative skills. And so, yeah, like Jenna said, way back we know each other, but that's just one of the fun things that I know about Jenna.
That is a really cool thing. Jenna, maybe our listeners know this, but you are basically like all of the Canva fonts in one pen. I feel like you could just look at something and then write that way, and that is a crazy cool gift. Um, Thanks, Morgan, for being here today. I am really excited to have this conversation and to hear more about your story. I have to get on my soapbox for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to get back off and we're going to continue on. But I have really been struggling, to be honest, lately, with a lot of different things related to my faith, which is a big thing to say here on this faith podcast that I host. But I am a part of the Nashville Girls Group. I'll just say it. And there are some spicy conversations that come out of that group. But this morning, someone posted and said, like, I'm not trying to change your beliefs, but I don't believe in God. And then, something else. Like, I believe in whatever this other, I don't even know what it was. I'm not going to try to quote it. But there were lots of responses, obviously. So I'm scrolling through, and there are some that are like, oh, God is real. You're wrong. Like, you don't want to end up in hell. You're missing out. All these responses. But there was one response that just struck me. And it was someone who was an admin in the group, and this is like thousands of women. And she said, I totally understand what you mean. And I have been exactly where you are. And then Jesus found me. And he changed everything about my life. And so I know, I agree. I feel what you feel right now. But then Jesus came. And I think that is exactly what we're doing here today. And Morgan, I really mean it. I'm so grateful that you were willing to come and just be honest and be vulnerable about your life. I don't know very many things about you, but I know that you are willing to be a part of this ministry. And I just think it makes such a difference to say, I know where you've been, but Jesus versus this is what you should do, and like the Bible says this, and you're wrong. Like all of those approaches, there's probably good things in those too, but it just means so much more, I think, when you say, I've sat in this seat, but Jesus came and he changed the game for me. So, um, thank you and all of our guests that have sat in the seat that you're sitting in today for that honesty. And I'm just excited to get to hear more about your story. So our first question, we ask these three questions to all of our guests. Our first question, Morgan, is how in the last couple of weeks have you been feeding your soul? What are you feasting on for your spirit?
So lately, I have been listening to a podcast called VOM, or it's known as Voice of the Martyrs. And so this podcast interviews different missionaries from around the world, different people from different countries that are under persecution for Christianity. And so it is incredibly encouraging to listen to it and get that different perspective, because honestly, like, we're not getting much persecution here. Not like it is in other countries where people are killed for their beliefs. And so it's very encouraging. I really appreciate it. And so I listen to that once a week. I listen to your podcast whenever it comes out, and I'm always really excited when it comes out. And I would say the other thing that has really been filling me up is the artist Ellie Holcomb. And she has so many albums, but lately it's been her albums that truly just sing through scripture. So she does a lot of psalms. And in fact, kind of what we're going to talk about today, yesterday I was sitting there singing one of her songs, and then I realized that it's one of the scriptures that I have for today. And so it was just, I thought, oh, this is such a full circle moment, because it's definitely what's been helping me and what I've been feasting on.
I love that. That's so many things. We will link all of those in the show notes for our listeners. But that's sweet, Jenna. As I think about the way you introduced her as someone that like led your kids in music, and then music is something that you have that fuels your spirit, Morgan. There's like that's very intentional, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. So next question number two. What is a way that you are fellowshipping with other believers in the last couple of weeks? How are you kind of sharing, I guess, what you're feasting on?
So honestly, we're kind of in a weird season right now where my husband is a minister, and so he's not pastoring at the time, so we do a lot of traveling. And so it's kind of fellowship in its own way. We're maybe going places that I don't know anyone in, but we're learning new names, new faces, new churches. But it also is that complicated thing where then we're not really here, and we're not really around our people or our friends that we would love to spend more time with. So as of now, it's kind of when we're traveling, but then also I work in a Christ-oriented homeless shelter, and so my coworkers are wonderful, and that is a lot of where I get to go in, and we talk about the good scriptures, and we talk about good songs, and we have praise and worship with the kids every morning, and we do chapel once a week. And so being able to really come in and be vulnerable with the girls at work is probably the biggest part right now where I'm fellowshipping at.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I would bet you're not the only person that. That doesn't, when I hear you talk about that, it makes me think like you don't have a home church necessarily where you're just settled in. You are being um, community for your husband, and you guys are meeting new people, but that's sometimes not very comfortable. And you don't probably have a lot of time to really get to know people as you bounce from place to place until the Lord plants you somewhere. So I I appreciate you saying that. Jenna, I'm going to put you on the spot, so feel free to defer this question. But I know that you guys, you and Brian, have been in a maybe similar situation in the past. As you hear Morgan talk about that experience, like what is that? What do you think of?
I just have been there. I know what it feels like. I know that it gets you in a place where you can feel defeated, but also very lonely. And her talking about being with her husband and following after him and being his helpmate is a big deal. Um, he needs that, and she doesn't know what a strength she is to him. And the Lord will bless the work that they're doing as they travel and are in those tiresome long car rides and things of that nature. The Lord will bless them, and it might not make sense right now, and there's not always answers immediately. And so I just want to be an encouragement that she is not alone.
Yeah, it makes me think, Jenna, that I'm going to quote you back to you. I don't know what week it was, or I don't know when it was, but you recently said, the Lord always provides community, and sometimes it's a big community. There, you are surrounded by all these people, and sometimes you might not feel it. You might feel lonely. There might not be people surrounding you, and you might not feel planted into that community, but it's a season, and seasons come and seasons go, and that's a hard season, Morgan, that you're in. We'll just give you credit for walking through what feels like is probably a difficult season.
It's a beautiful season as well. In that Jeremy and I have grown a lot together, and um, and then too, I always wanted to see churches everywhere. I always wanted to know people who have that same communion because of salvation. And so that is something that it always blesses me, is that being able to walk into a church house and feel the Lord's presence, and someone who you don't really even know saying exactly what you need to hear because the Lord led them to say that. Those are really beautiful moments. And we were in Michigan recently, and kind of my lame joke that I always say is like, well, I didn't have to make the bed this morning. We were in a hotel, and I didn't have to make breakfast this morning, so it's pretty great. And a brother looked at me, and he just shook his head, and I was like, uh-oh, what'd I say? And he shook his head, and he said, don't downgrade what you do. Like, the Lord is using you in whatever you do when you come, and he is using you in encouraging us, and he's using you. And so his point was like, it's not just about Jeremy, it's not just about although that's the important piece, but that there is still work to do, and there is still a purpose. So it's been it's had its difficult moments, but it is a very beautiful season.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, question number 3 is about forgiveness. So talk to us, people that, well, Jen well, talk to us about a reason of a thing that you are needing to find forgiveness in Jesus for.
Yeah, so before Jenna even asked me to do the podcast, I kind of knew that it was coming. And I think the Lord was just gracious in that he was kind of just preparing me for that. And as I would listen to the podcast and people would say, what they were feasting on, and then what they were finding forgiveness in, I felt very convicted of, man, I'm not in my word every day. And I knew immediately that that's what I was going to have to share, that I find forgiveness for is just not spending the time in the Word as I should. And it hurts my heart because I want to seek the Lord. I want to read His Word out of adoration for Him. I don't want it to just be a checklist thing, although sometimes we have to kind of make it a checklist thing to do those hard seasons of life. But what it tells me, in that I'm struggling with it, is that maybe my heart's not quite where it needs to be, because I want to love Him more, and I want to seek Him more, and I want to know Him more. And I know that by being in His Word, that's how we do that. And so those are the things that I'm really seeking forgiveness for, and have been, it feels like, for a long time. So still praying, still asking the Lord to help me to just be able to love His Word, to seek His Word, to seek Him in it as I know I should. So.
That's a really good one. I feel like a lot of people would probably agree or understand or need forgiveness for that same thing. So I really appreciate you sharing. We're gonna change gears now, although I feel like we've really already, like, we could have made a podcast episode out of your responses, Morgan, because they were just so good. Um, but we're in a series, a summer series, about the lies we tend to believe and the actual truth that we should replace them with. And today we're talking about the lie that I am alone. And Morgan, I just want you to tell us, like, what were some of your initial thoughts when you heard about this lie, I'm alone?
So it hits home for me. It's definitely a lie that I have struggled with in the past. Some of my darkest moments in life, that was the lie that really took hold in my heart, is that no one will understand. No one's been through this before. No one's going to understand. And I'm all alone in the way that I'm thinking, in the way that I'm feeling. It is, I don't know that everybody experiences this lie. I don't know that it's a common one, but for me, as I was thinking about, what we might talk about tonight, it just hit my heart hard. Like, I just knew that this was what I needed to do, because it's been so detrimental in my life as well.
I I have been thinking about this and, like, praying over this and trying to prepare. And I think this one has a lot of facets to it, because I think I would probably say about myself that I haven't really felt like no one is here, like I'm alone in that standpoint. Like, maybe when I was in college and all my friends were engaged and I wasn't, like, maybe then I had, like, a loneliness that no one was with me. But I think the way I experience this, honestly, even now, is that the second part that you said, like, no one understands. No one else experiences this. Um, and so it's not, because I have people around me literally all the time. And so I think it's not the literal loneliness, but it's the I am alone in feeling the way that I feel, or in experiencing the things that I feel. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Jenna, tell me your thoughts. Tell me what your experience has been with this
Jesus talked about it probably the best, about loneliness and being alone. And there are good sides to being alone, He tells us to go alone and pray. He tells us to seek the Lord, but he also reminds us that we are not alone and that his Father is always with us. The Father was with him in his darkest moments. And I think Jesus is the best example. And I'm sure Morgan will say that. But I think being alone is, like you said, there's so many facets of it. And we've all felt some type of aloneness in our lives. And it may be that we're afraid that no one understands us. It could be that we're physically alone. It could be that you're in a painful season and you have to go at it yourself. You have to face that suffering. I feel like maybe we all have a different perspective of loneliness in this being alone factor, and I'm sure we'll cover lots of them. But I would say that this is probably, in my opinion, this is something that most people have had at least one experience with it.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I love that you, Jenna, brought up the whole idea of that there are some times when it's good to be alone. And it's like, I think a phrase that we use is like to steal away and like hide yourself away from the world, from people, and like spend time with the Lord. And a lot of growth can happen in that. But then, the opposite of that is like I always feel like I'm alone. I always feel like I am not being seen and not being understood. And so you're right. There's a lot of facets, and I'm sure we'll talk about them. Morgan, one of the questions, and I didn't send you this, I'm sorry, but one of the questions I thought of to this morning that I want to hear you talk about is, you know, I don't know if you're in a season of loneliness right now, but in the past, when you have been, will you talk about the but Jesus part of it? Like you did feel lonely, or you were in this situation where you felt like no one understood you, but then Jesus. Like, talk to us about what it looks like to move out of that for you.
So the time that I can really go back to was a really dark season for me. I dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety. I had been a caretaker for my grandfather for 3.5 years, and we were out in the boonies, away from everybody. So I was literally lonely because I didn't have much community. I wasn't able to see many friends or anything like that. But I felt really alone in the way that I was feeling. And it was the first time that I had experienced anything like that. And so, to be honest, I didn't even know what it was. And I thought there was something seriously wrong with me that no one else had experienced ever in their life. And just the thoughts and the emotions and the spiraling that I would go through, I had no idea. I had no idea that there were other people experiencing that situation. And now I know it's like everybody. Like that we all go through seasons like that, very understandably with circumstances in life. And so what happened, my but Jesus moment in that season was, well, there were a lot of things, but the one that kind of was the catalyst to come out of that season was that I just really started questioning everything. I don't know that I would say I ever questioned my salvation, but it was as the whole, is this even real? Am I just making this up? Is this, just a fairy tale, like that I just want to believe in? And I was on my knees in the bedroom that I stayed at in my grandfather's house, and I just said to the Lord, you've got to show me right now. You've got to prove it to me, and you've got to prove it to me right now, because I don't know if I can go on any longer if you don't. And I mean, just to say it simply, I know that I had some sort of kind of experience in that moment. I just had this feeling from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, and it just kind of rushed over me. And I think about it as just his peace and his comfort just surrounded me. And that was kind of the catalyst that then pushed me to lean into the Lord more. He proved himself. He doesn't have to do that, but he proved himself in that moment. And I started reading more and I started praying more. And a big piece of me coming out of that season of depression was that I started reaching out to people. I would send people cards and I would send them notes and letters and things like that. I would text or I would call them and get outside of myself, because I think that's what had happened is, and often happens when we're spiraling, is that we just turn inward and all we can see is ourself and all we can think about is ourself and our issues and what's happened to us. And so when I started reaching out and I started being intentional to reach out to people and make those connections, that was along with my study in the Lord and pushing into the Lord and really relying on him and leaning on him. That's when I started kind of coming out of that season.
I'm almost speechless. I am so grateful that you shared that story, and I just think, like, and you said he doesn't have to prove himself to us, but how gracious and kind and good he is that he does. And that I could not have asked you to tell a better story. So, I'm so I'm like torn with feelings. It breaks my heart to hear you talk about being in a season like that. Like that is um, not something that we want for anyone. But the way that you're using it now, like I just think about the blessing that it will be for other people listening who might be in that same place to hear you say, like I've been there, but this is how I came out of it, and this is how the Lord brought me through. Um, I think will be really powerful for the people that need to hear it. So thank you for sharing that. I think I've said thank you like 12 times now. I'll probably have to edit some of those out. People are gonna think I'm crazy. Um, okay. Another thing that we normally do, and actually I'm gonna pause. Jenna, do you have any? Do you want to respond? Do you have anything that you want to say
I do
about what?
because I remember Morgan taking care of her grandfather. I remember that season of her life, and I would have never known that you were spiraling because you were taking care of other people. You were reaching out, you were messaging, you were friendly, you were doing all these jobs, and I see now that that was the Lord working in you, and it inspires me. It gives me chills that in your darkest moments, the Lord turned it around and used it for good for you to bless others. And I think that is so powerful. You already said that it's powerful, but it is powerful when we can take our feelings that everyone, we're not alone in those feelings. Other people have those feelings. They may have them even deeper, and we don't realize that they're struggling. And so it really makes me realize the importance of reaching out to my friends and my community that the Lord has put in my life and just checking in. But it also reminds me to continue keeping my eyes on Jesus. It's when we take our eyes, like Morgan said, it's when we take our eyes off of Him that we just really lose focus. And if we can put our focus on the Lord, on our Creator, on the one who cares for us so much that He gave His own Son for us, when we can put our focus there, it kind of makes the problems not go away, but it gives us the strength to continue on in them, knowing that in all things He works for our good to those that love Him.
It's sweet to hear you talk about your perspective as Morgan walked through that season, and it's so different from how Morgan describes it. Um, but I love what you said. It's a great example of how the Lord uses, like Morgan was reaching out to those people because she had to for her own self. But it was blessing those people at the same time. It was healing her and blessing them at the same time. Uh, so I'm really glad that you pointed that out. One thing that we have been doing, Morgan, well, you know this because you're prepared. Our guests have been coming into these conversations with some kind of example in the scripture of an experience where the person maybe felt this lie or that somehow ties to this lie. Tell us kind of where you went in the scripture as you're thinking about this lie that I'm alone.
Yeah. So I think the one that probably stood out to the majority of people thinking about this would be the account of Elijah. That's something that is often talked about in church and in Bible studies and in sermons, because he does all these great things for the Lord, and the altar is consumed in fire, and the drought is broken, and then he gets so afraid that he runs away, and then he says to the Lord, I am the only one who's zealous. I'm the only one left. I'm the only one. I'm all alone. I'm over here in this cave, and I'm all alone. And it just shows me that it's a common experience that he felt that way, that he was alone. And then we know that the Lord passes by and he tells them, no, there's 7,000 others, that have never bowed before Baal. And so I love the account of Elijah there and when he's at Mount Horeb. And then, of course, we can't say that without saying that the Lord wasn't in all of the big scary things, but that he was in the still small voice, that he was in that quiet whisper. And how often when we are feeling so isolated and so alone, does he show up that way? And the experience that I spoke about, even though in my mind it's so big and it might feel like so loud in my mind, it was so quiet in the moment. There weren't big flashes of light or fireworks or anything like that. He just covered me. And so that's what I always think about with Elijah. And he sounds like a little stuck in self-pity. And that's what I also think about with that feeling of alone, or that no one will understand, or that no one's ever been through this before. Once again, we turn inward and it becomes all of those I statements. I'm the only one who's ever experienced this, and it's all about us. We're making it about ourselves. And I heard a great saying one time from a sister, and she said that self-pity is just a different form of pride, because we're just pointing at ourselves. We're just bringing the attention to ourselves. We can't get out of our own way. We can't think about other people because we're so consumed with thinking about ourselves. And that's not always the situation, but a lot of times I've found that when I'm stuck in self-pity, that I'm just like, hey, look at me. Look at all the things I'm going through. And so that's kind of what it reminds me of there. Elijah's just ready to die. He's done these great things, and like the Lord passes by and does these awesome things, and then he's so afraid that he's like, just take me on. Just take me out of here.
Mm-hmm. That story is a doozy. So, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you to go read it, because Morgan, you're exactly right. It's like wild, unbelievable, crazy, miracle after miracle after miracle, and then he gets scared and just it is like throws in the towel. Like says, "Can't do this. There's no one else here. I'd rather you just take me." So, I think that's a great example of feeling like you're all alone. Um, Jenna.
I think we try to coast on those mountaintops. I think we think that we should go from one mountaintop to the next mountaintop to the next mountaintop, the next big thing from the Lord, the great big thing that I should write a whole story about. I think we think that at times. I think that we expect God to do all these miraculous big things that we read about in the Bible, but there are these moments, if you'll look closely, they're not all mountaintops where the Lord shows up. He shows up in valleys over and over and over again. And it's after those valleys that each of those people are like all of those characters in the Bible who are not characters, they're real people. They're history for us. All of them have learned to pull closer to the Lord, to lean into Him after those valleys. And I think it speaks louder of Him when He comes to us in those still small moments. And I don't know about you, but when I walk through something and no one else knows about it and the Lord just shows up for me, when He speaks to me, I just feel like I just get more out of it. Yes, it's great when He does big things and everyone sees it, but those special moments where He just speaks to me, just like He did with Morgan, like He did with Elijah, and He just speaks to them, I think it's beautiful that the Lord is willing. He's the creator of the universe. He holds the stars in place, and yet He thinks on me and wants to speak to me. And I think we forget who He is and who we have in Him.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes I can be like Elijah and I can like be so encouraged during those big big things that and big ways that the Lord shows up, and then I forget. I just forget so quickly is what He's done, and then I find myself in that pit of self-pity and can't, really see things other than myself. Morgan, I've asked you a lot of questions. Is there something about this lie that you want to share that we haven't talked about yet?
I think it goes back to what Jenna was saying earlier. One of the first things she said is um, that even if no one else can share in your experience, God is still there. And I have so many scriptures about that, and I'm hoping I can find them quickly. But I mean, the one that we always go to is that I will never leave you or forsake you, and that's there in Hebrews 13. Like I said, I was singing that song, the Psalm 139, and I was trying to pick out, okay, well, what scriptures in this psalm are really saying what I am trying to share? And I was like, okay, it's the whole psalm. It's the whole one. It's the whole thing. But it's where I started was Psalm 139, verse 7. Where can I go from His Spirit? Or where can I go from your presence? And then jumping down to verse 11, I love this so much. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, the light around me will be night. In verse 12, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike to you. And so that's just His omnipotent self. Like, that's His all-powerful being, is that the light and the dark are the same to Him. And in the darkest night that I experience, or that any of us experience, that He is still there, and that nothing can keep Him from us. And no matter how dark it gets and how hard it gets, nothing can keep Him from us. I love this scripture that we quote so often of he's near to the brokenhearted. He saves those of a contrite spirit. And so even if we're going through a really hard season and we're saying, Lord, you don't understand how broken my heart is. You don't understand, it tells us that, and it promises to us that he's going to be near to us in those moments. And so what better promise to say that when you are at your lowest, that the Lord Jesus is still near you, and he still desires you, and he's still pursuing you, even in those hardest, gut-wrenching moments.
I love that. There's a pastor that I know that's walking through a really hard season for kind of a long time, actually. And he talks about this very thing that you just mentioned, Morgan, about like God, the day and the night are the same to him. He is not fazed by the things that faze us. And he was the pastor was talking about his journey, um, and he said, this feels like the end of my world today. I feel like I can't go on, but this is just like any other Tuesday to the Lord. Like he's going to show up the same today that he has every other day, because he is not fazed by all of these things um, that that get us down, that burden us like we are. And I just appreciate you sharing those scriptures, because I think that is probably something that gets us through, right? In those times, having those scriptures to lean on is what will get us through. Jenna, anything in your notes that we didn't say?
I think a lot. I think the point that I would love to make just about talking that the Lord's not fazed by any of that is to remember that He does care for us, and that all the burdens that we're facing, Jesus took on Himself, and He felt the abandonment, He felt the loneliness, He felt the fear, He felt those things on our behalf. And there's no one any better than the Lord Jesus to turn to, because it says if we'll cast our cares on Him, He cares for us. And He will carry those burdens that we can't carry for ourselves. Those lonely moments where there's no escape, there's no way out, there's no one here for me, no one understands it. He does. And so when you get to believing this lie or feeling this lie, just know that you really aren't alone. Jesus is already there.
Yeah. All right, Morgan, anything else that you want to share today with us before we wrap up?
I think just an encouragement to be vulnerable and to not only share when maybe you're feeling like you're all alone, but also share when those hard seasons come and those hardships come. Jeremy and I are walking through I've said season 400 times. I'm so sorry. Let me try again.
No, you're fine.
It's like one of those Christian words that everybody uses. Season. It's my season.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are experiencing infertility right now, and I was really struggling to find someone who was coming at it or who had came at it from the same perspective as myself. And so when I would talk to people, it's not that what they said was bad or anything like that, but it just felt like we weren't quite on the same page about it. And so one Sunday morning we were visiting at a church, and it was one of those moments where the Lord said, you're going to have to sing this song, and you're going to have to tell this whole group of people that you don't know that you're experiencing infertility. And so I get up from praying, crying. I go to the piano crying. I sing the song crying. Not exactly how you want to do it, right? You want to seem polished. You want to, have your life together. But that's just that was just the truth of what I was going through in the moment. And so I shared that experience with people, with the whole church. And afterwards, a sister came up and she said, I want to talk to you later. And so we started talking about her experience of infertility. And what was so helpful to me was that I would say, people say this to me, or they tell me this, or this is how I'm feeling in this season. And she was just like, yep, and you're going to have to surrender it. And every single thing that I said, she said, yep, and you're going to have to surrender that too. And you're just going to have to keep on surrendering it. And to be honest, what she told me was, you may never have a child. And she was so honest with me, and that's exactly what I was needing. And so she was coming from a really similar place, and she understood what I was going through, and we had the same mentality about it. And so I just so appreciated the Lord putting her in my path and giving her the vulnerability to be able to share that with me. And so I think I want to encourage people to share their experiences, because when the Lord rescues us from these things, or when we come out on the other side and he has sanctified us through it, that becomes part of our testimony. And it's what then we can go to someone, younger or going through the same thing and say, like, I know exactly what you're going through. This is our experience with it. And this is how the Lord brought us through. And that's the most important part, is really pointing to the Lord, that he is our refuge, that he is our rescuer, that he is our stronghold in all of these experiences that we have. If we're not willing to share it, then it's almost wasting it. It's almost saying as if it wasn't good enough to share, or I don't want people to think about me a certain way, or whatever the thing is. I just have one verse that I want to read along those lines. And it's 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. Hold on, I want to get there because I don't want to mess this up. I color-coded my tabs so I could find them easier. Okay, so 2 Corinthians 4 and 7 says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessel, so that the surpassing greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves. And this is one of the important pieces. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not despairing, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our body. For we who live are constantly being delivered over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. And so that treasure that it talks about is the gospel. It's part of how we are, it's a part of our testimony. It's who we are as Christians. And earlier in that same chapter, it says, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. And so when we are not willing to share these things, when we are not willing to be vulnerable, oftentimes there are people who are suffering the same things. They're going through the same experiences or similar experiences, and they are just longing for someone to reach out and to tell them that it's okay, and that they're not alone, and that the Lord is their stay and their guide and their help.
Thank you for sharing that, Morgan. Thank you for being here and having this conversation. If I may say, thank you for sharing your real life burdens, and just know that for sure myself and Jenna um, know a little bit better how to pray for you and your husband now. But I love, this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll let you guys talk and we'll wrap it up. But I noticed as you talk about your season that you're in right now, and that's what you're experiencing, you said when. You said when the Lord brings us through this, not if. And I don't know if you recognize that confidence in yourself, and your confidence that the Lord will bring you through this. But I noticed it, and so I wanted to highlight that for you and for listeners. It's not if He's going to be there with you. It's when He brings you through this. It's when He delivers you through this. When He sanctifies you through this. That that you'll, when you get to the other side, that you'll be able to look back and see where He brought you. So, thank you so much for being here. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I think that our listeners will too. So, thanks,
Thank
Morgan.
you.
Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the table. We hope today's conversation encouraged you as you seek Jesus in the big moments and the little ones. Check out the show notes for any scripture, resources, whatever we talked about today. Feel free to share this episode, leave a comment, ask a question, or share your thoughts with us. Jenna and I will continue this conversation next week and talk more about the wisdom that's shared with us here. We hope you know this, but if you need someone to walk through a difficult situation with you, you're not alone. We are building this community for this specific reason, so lean in. Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, go follow us on socials to see all the things we'll share throughout the week. We'll see you next time.